place of Far East territories and all of the above. This is actually a main feature of my entire approach and my entire character for that matter, and in that context I'm going to find profound significance of Japan and China in delivering Serbia and Macedonia as cultural settings with that level of imperial significance, which of course sums in substance to imperial bloodlines. I will notice, however, the importance of presence of blue color, where the main colors of the imperial protocols of our territories continue to be red, blue, and white, and I'm going to give strong reminder that red cannot be replaced with fire. My work has explained here that we talk about the entire concept of Far East countries and everything that, for example, Buddhism in that matter brings on stage either by the actual crafted person with all of the structures and layers of how a person from this territory is crafted to excel in approaches to actual substance of all of what is the real drivers of the entire imperial protocol, which somehow is everything on this planet, as everything on this planet ends up to be rather that they consume the symbols than to live by, which is the phenomenon typical for this planet. That will need to be noticed, and maybe that is where we are going to notice Martians or Orion becoming such consumers of the symbols rather than appreciating and living by. So I'm going to be very careful now where and how to detect the blue dimension, and this is not going to be actually just yellow. In imperial terms, we do not get to notice that phi yellow, but rather gold, which is already second-hand reference to something old. It cannot be excluded reference to actual yellow, blonde hair population by certain nations, and there is nothing wrong about it. My point here is we cannot replace gold with yellow. I have also impression, speaking of symbols, therefore, I have also impression that the planet deploys itself very much at the consuming point of its symbols rather than living by them. White is imperial color, that is saying no to green Muslim territories. So there is a wall here in Serbia with Muslim territories, and that wall should be understood as Serbia is white state and it means different identity. How we maintain our imperial protocol is another story, but then we are awakening today again in becoming ourselves again. It is another story, are we going to build walls or we are going to regulate or we are going to bring cultural defining points on each of the territories so they don't need to jump over the gate to another properties? That is another question, but when we are to talk about identity, then it has to be noticed what will need to be noticed here. White is not green and it means something. It means that we talk about different identity, crafted in different way, existing in different way, talking in different way, behaving in different way in order to get imperial status. In this context, I would like to point out my intention is not to promote some kind of racism, but just to explain the meaning of white color and the meaning of white population, which usually is associated to northern territories that have traditionally become as a result of influences of ice age and much more unattractive climate of northern territories inclined to actually live much more in different lifestyle and to be accommodated to different lifestyle, much more indoor activities, much more actually devoted to um, uh, creativity and ultimately confronting its own mental capacity and ultimately deploying stronger side, mental side, and stronger intellect because simply the life conditions of northern territories is not that much attractive as for example in Mediterranean. So I just want to point out the build-up of certain category of population in terms of lifestyle and how that at some point become imperial category. In the same time, I want to differentiate strongly here white, blue from green. Although very often we find green as W and going into white as a result of mixed bloodlines because these are the territories, this enormous Asia, European basin, there are not exactly too much prevented to population to move from one part of the world of the plateau to another. We have enormous significant presence of mixed bloodlines here. Green mixed bloodlines would become white actually in European part. And I want to point out also what means now when you appear from green into blue, that you basically exist in different conditions and differently defined life conditions, and that will need to be noticed here. We talk therefore about very codified, very regulated, very defined behavior and protocol. Blue, which I have initially identified in my character, I would call allowing itself to go outside of the frame, speaking to the clouds, connecting to the clouds, and regulating the clouds in the same time. It will have to be like that if you want to declare imperial stamp. It is that you regulate everything, you don't become product of it. To formulate, understand, explain all that matters. That is how you bring them on the flag, the colors, because you have formulated them, giving them certain format and certain coordinates. It is not free run on the field, and that also will need to be noticed here. But what becomes to be my point here is that I talk about something that has been neglected because of the distance, and that is influence of Far East countries in the way how the imperial protocol on our Mediterranean plateau actually merges to levels of such significance where no one was eager to present days to give credit to territories for that, but in contrary, we continue to talk about some kind of hunting rather than certifying and recognizing as a matter of building this world out of the best practices, not out of civilizational and as a matter of civilizational build-up. As a result, we found this planet today very much on providing best practices and rewarding best practices for hunting, and that is as we speak. And I really don't understand how and what that has to do with any specific story here of some specific characters when we talk about how the civilization behave and how it cannot behave anymore. I have not asked for your name and surname, but it is to be clear that people without name and surname do not get to hold positions either. There is absolutely out of question that we reflect the same houses here yet I'm not giving up on that protocol because I have noticed that there is a much more absolute dimension attached to it, and that is genetics. And beyond that, what the genetics actually created in all of the times. I'm not going to deny such people, including myself, just because the previous have been doing all of the wrong. And it is a matter of approach. So to say I'm closing the previous circle and I'm declaring, formulating the new one because simply I'm capable of doing that. This is also being very much personal question, being said in context of tribunal approaches of 2 millenniums ago launched to now territories, which have been decided over my kind while keeping the accomplished results, keeping the entitlements, keeping the political references, keeping the history of which yet some of us have found ourselves completely excluded. It is question of legal correctness, but above all of returning to actual standards here. I still believe that many people out there believe in reason and logic rather than in any other point of valuation. Today I have not declared my presence by the protocol but by the logic and reason. I have just said I am taking the protocol with me, but that is not my face. My face is logic and reason, and I believe that most of the people sign on the same account. So yes, I continue to believe that I am going to prevail in numbers without even to bother to check in what uniform that support is going to come. But again, returning to what I wanted to say in this occasion, I expect therefore that the territories as it is, Macedonia and Serbia, continue to be now reawakened and reincarnated on very specific and exact parameters on which I have done that with my own presence, as nothing else would make much sense. There is a glorious music and glorious history written, but they are all in relation to glorious events. And unless you can describe that in the exact and precise words, you're part of the audience, or you would like to describe your contribution eventually, so it becomes clearly where exactly is your place. So it becomes clear where is exactly your place. So what means recalibrating the territories? So when in question Macedonia and Serbia, I'm talking about principal influences of China and Japan, which on the other side equally do not have exactly strong monarchies at the moment. In Japan, because it comes in the face of two atomic bombs, and China, because it comes in face of devastated monarchy of the previous century, harshly wiped out from the territories, and everything brought on levels of some kind of collective consciousness with strong system of oligarchies. Monarchy protocol would be very much international identity. There would be so many layers to all of that, and it's very hard to really comprehend real dimension of this entire matter unless you're directly involved with it or you're part of it, and really hard and really hard that you put everything in one, and it is really hard that you put everything in one description here. Also, I'm going to notice that the society would not even know how they are related, but on some levels centers would know. So I'm not going to find the entire situation with monarchies that much simple and that much on white and black, but the fact is that we don't have active monarchies on the territories, and to that extent I'm going to be very much reserved how far I'm going to run to hug now my grandparents there, while actually they would be categorized as in exile still. Now, when in question Serbia, there and Macedonia, of course, in dispersion of the situation in which they are eager to go out there into some kind of negotiation, well, neither they have established properly monarchical protocol. However, both of the sides using my work, which is being declared as work of monarch, so that is a bit peculiar to find them now getting ready to go into some kind of negotiation on the daylight of my work. It is rather laughable as well. I just wonder what they would be talking about. The principles of hunting me eventually and sharing my mind, body, and soul. None of that is exactly shareable, one would argue. I really need to understand. Take a day off to think how they have been approaching sharing of mind, body, and soul in all of these times. No wonder they are where they are. So, yeah, it is a bit laughable when you find these characters now going out there to negotiate on the parameters of work of active monarch, declaring itself as active monarch as we speak, and whose work they are actually following very vividly. It is the burlesque still going on here. Well, let's say it is quite big chunk of what you're after here. Big chunk of something I was never thinking that way about something like that. But I will say, since I have not been asked for any of this before, I needed to jump on it. Nothing is going to surprise me anymore, really. In any case scenario, what I want to say is that we have here presenting that bloodline as well, with this wow factor. Now that is actually wow, but also is going to make everything much more simpler without me going too much into some kind of traumatic state, considering the fact that I do not speak Chinese, although the letters are quite of artistry, yet being representative would be meaning promise for perfect order. It would mean sunrise again in a promise. In other terms, it would mean we need to start doing everything more like again because the previous circle is obsolete, and today everything should look like we are getting our next level on PlayStation and reinventing the entire performance of the entire behavior. However, what I want to say here, the main reason why I'm reincarnating the entire monarchy protocol is delivering the planetary level, and that is bigger than Chinese level, and it is not walking on the modesty level, although in fact I'm a very modest person. But now you will never understand this universe anyway. I really don't know why in this moment Earth sounds to me smaller than China. In any case scenario, it is easier to speak Earth than to speak China. I feel more as I would not be Chinese enough. I would also not like to offend Chinese population here because I'm not born in China, but I will certainly here say one reason why I'm recovering the entire monarchy protocol is because I want to do second run of it, not because I want to recognize it as it is. And why I want to do second run on it is or whatever run it is, because I'm recognizing the vertical point here. Now that is vertical point, as that is how we call consciousness, what we call identity, and it is going as far as it is. That we end up very often to talk about Earth itself, and that is also a scary subject. So most of the time you feel it is not even appropriate to think that way, but just by bringing yourself in your human dimension, you already bring yourself in certain formation, and that is your formation is human. That is from where you start. So you have to therefore here bring the meaning of certain dimension in human protocol, and that is what we do here in humane terms, in humane language, in humane parameters. Very much it is about new beginning on the parameters on which we find human absolute on this planet as well to sustain, and it is not same for us on what terms. Therefore, let's focus on specifics here, and that is also going to explain why many of us would not have as an answer why that flag of Macedonia is very much same as one of the flags of Japan. And now look the cultural setting of Japan, look the cultural setting of Macedonia. Who on earth you think is older here? I mean, isn't it though just that define Japan more serious a crafty dominion, while the cultural identity in Macedonia is hard even to integrate? It is hard to recognize. If there were not references as monuments and amphitheaters, it would be absolutely impossible to identify the cultural fabric of the population. In Japan, you bring that conclusion without looking for monuments. You look at the population and you understand the craft of the population. Again, I'm not going to get over idealistic here. I just want to point out that the build of societies here looks to me much more serious. It appears to me that not just principles of moral and ethics and how they relate to moral and ethics, but the entire build-up of civilization is much more foundational. It is much more heavy structured on the foundational perspective, which we in Europe appear that do not have that much of a weight about. We in Europe are always much prevailing on some kind of entertaining side. It is always about getting out there into celebration of something. We certainly excel in building entertainment industry for sure, but when it comes to establishing of some to recognizing some much more firm foundations, I'm not sure that we will lead the world in that kind of competition. We here speaking of within some kind of national sentiment rather than personal identity aspect. I consider myself a serious person. The work I deliver here, I consider serious, although I'm not aware of the dimension of it because I can't perceive it. I can't see what's going on around me, so I'm quite in a blind spot here. But I can safely say I'm not joking about what I'm doing, so I don't want to jump into this easily. I don't want to be disrespectful to what are the facts of the ground, because this work is not a run for national president. Let's say it is more like I'm searching for correct answers here rather than being political, or you would say patriotic. I'm not saying that I'm not patriotic here, but sometimes being patriotic will be more are you correct or just? Or you're living in some kind of clouds of illusion, but then you're patriotic and you end up being a fool. I think being rational and sober is more patriotic above all, and it is this kind of work we usually are in search of correct. In this kind of work, we are usually in search of correct answers. That is why it is close to mathematics and usually does have this kind of presentation in very strict order. But we search for correct answer here to our questions, and these are not our personal questions, not always, not all of them. Therefore, I have been talking all this time about principal bloodlines, and now clearly I have no intention to drop it because it feels like I need to drop myself, and that is not happening anytime soon. So we are talking here about recognizing what are the actual ingredients in this kind of protocol, and of course, would it be surprised that I would be talking about moral and ethics on principal account? Would it be surprised that I'm going to be the most impressed by such qualifications, and I continue to be the most impressed by some by similar standards of accomplishment. Now, someone is saying there is a character that continue to be amazed by storytelling for kids. Excuse me, we call we call it moral and ethics. Everything depends on the conduct, everything depends on behavior, it is critical, and everything then builds out of it. That is where you become protocol human, protocol society, protocol monarchy, because it becomes a recipe book. It becomes a book of recommendation, how you build society, And of course, it goes to all of the specifics I have been talking about in all of these years. Another element I'm going to find absolutely not to be ignored is attention to details and sophistication that comes out of it, and one will say that is going last. But I wonder, would it not be initially because look, the creation of this entire nature, it is not about attention. If it is not about attention to details, look the shape of the flowers. If that is not attention of details, I don't know what that is. It all comes in instance, and it is not product of long developing practices, but it is actually the impact of someone's being, and that is why I'm going to find this visualization profoundly important, because you can find the birthplace of all of that on these territories more than on any other. I'm not complimenting anyone because I consider myself part of this entire formulation. So I'm going to say I would be complimenting myself, therefore, or I would be recognizing it in my own nature, in my own character, these features, and I would be giving them first place, and then I'm going where I'm going to recognize them on the ground or on the planetary levels. Also, I would notice these features very often without thinking that much of myself, as when we admire nature or something like that. You just notice things and you just align with some vibes. Now, second question is, would such sensitivity just end there? Of course it would not. Of course it becomes continuation to what I then continue talking about, principal imperial bloodlines. That would happen. Some were bringing divine music, and someone and everyone wondering from what that is emerging, from where that divine music is emerging. But how can person like that have created such divine music? Speaking of Mozart, for example, or how can person like that bring such divine structured work? And you see, the answer will never here fall from the sky immediately. And although I just said maybe in the aspect of sophistication we talk about impact of the entire nature. Even so, let's recognize that blast all of such the dimension in humanity of all of such dimension in humanity elsewhere, everywhere, and we still today talk about ranking in terms of when it comes to either recognizing importance of morality or ethics, or either when it comes to recognizing the element as a matter of cultural identity. And I'm going to go with that now as a main parameter. We don't need here to take away anything from territories and people that have developed in time to various collective cultures to recognizable set of values in all the times. It is very hard to ignore here the predatory nature of everyone. But I'm doing my best here, ignoring certain aspects because I'm determined not to erase this planet just like that. I'm dedicated to it. So I'm going to ignore what you're trying to tell me because I have chosen to say something on what I want to take with me into the future. So I'm speaking today about what I'm speaking in order in which I have deployed that, which is protocol human, constitutional earth, and spending most of the time on discussing cultural identities and meaning of it in any single aspect of our living. In that context, therefore, needless to say, connecting not to actual governments of the territories but to concept of cultural identity, which is closer to protocol monarchy, that I equally have recognized and reinvented here clearly on my terms, as the protocol means exactly that. It means terms or it is not protocol. While I have been elaborating this in terms of more specific alliance than in any of the times before, that will need to be noticed. It is like the protocol is about to get born in real legal terms now, as before that would have been not exactly like that. And on that line it would be obviously to start from Japan and China again. I have not studied in specifics the families that are in Japan, for example, and very often I feel that principles should always walk first and then everything else. But the history itself and historic heritage within the context of cultural integrity of territories would have its place if not in conflict with something, in this case scenario with this work and my presence, or ultimately become reassessed via that conflict. And to the extent that I'm not just the new vibe or the new voice, but also the voice of legal recalibration, constitutional recalibration, recognizing conflicting lines will become a matter of substance.